My name is Willa Farrell, and the last word my father ever spoke to me was go. I was only 11. I stood on the sharp gravel with a canvas duffel bag while my aunt's headlights cut through the dark yard, and he refused to turn around. For 20 years, I believed that man threw me away like a bag of sour feed. I built my entire life on that pain, 3 states away, making sure I never needed another soul. Then, last August, my phone buzzed on a beach towel. The text read, "Fly home, do not say anything to your parents." I almost laughed. They had not been parents to me in decades. But the next message named 2 specific people, and my stomach bottomed out. I flew home that night, only to find a lawyer and 2 police officers waiting at my gate, with news that completely shattered me. It is crazy how the cruelest thing my father ever did turned out to be his greatest kindness. But what my mother did next is the part that still makes my hands shake. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the quietest people always hold all the cards. If you have ever been handed a false story about your own life, stick with me, drop a comment, and subscribe. Let me back up so you know who you are riding with. I am 31 years old, working as a large animal vet outside Bozeman, Montana. Most of my job happens at 3 in the morning in a frozen barn somewhere. The night before this started, I had my arm inside a heifer named Pickle, trying to turn a calf that had decided to come out sideways in the freezing cold. The rancher was crying that night, and his wife was praying. I was the only calm person in a 40-mile radius, which is usually how it goes. People do not call me because they like me. They call because the worst has already happened, and they need someone who will not flinch. I am good at being the steady hands in the darkest hour of a stranger's life. When the calf finally came out slick and breathing, the rancher hugged me. I let him for exactly 2 seconds before I started packing up my gear. That is the thing nobody warns you about when you grow up the way I did. You learn to make yourself useful like a tool, but you never learn how to be wanted like a person. Back then, my life was simple. A paid-off truck, a busy practice, and a quiet kitchen with just one single chair. My Aunt Ruth always said I collected excuses to skip Thanksgiving the way other women collect recipes. And she was right. For 20 years, I tried to prove I did not need anyone, especially not the family that shipped me away at 11 and never wrote back. I would have kept hiding forever if Ruth had not booked a beach house in the Outer Banks and refused to let me weasel out of it. Summer there was loud in a wonderful way. Her grown kids were running around, and the porch smelled like sunscreen and steamed shrimp. Technically, they were not my direct blood. Ruth was my father's younger sister, and when he sent me away, she could have easily treated me like an unwanted charity case. Instead, Ruth taught me to drive a tractor, signed my report cards, and sat in the very front row when I got my doctorate. Her household was the only real family I ever had. On our 3rd evening at the beach, one of the kids asked me when I would take her to see my old Nebraska farm, the one with the red barn and the old photo on Ruth's wall. The porch went completely quiet. Ruth set down her tea, a sudden tightness in her eyes like a woman bracing a door against a storm. She told the girl not to fill her head with that place, then quickly changed the subject to the local fireworks. I let it drop, but later, while I was drying dishes, I caught her watching me with a strange, heavy look. It was the look you give someone when you are terrified they are about to uncover a secret. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, pouring a glass of wine and walking out to the dunes to watch the ocean grow dark. Then, my phone buzzed. I figured it was my answering service with another midnight barn emergency, but it was an unknown number with a text that would burn my quiet life to the ground. It read, "Fly home. Do not say anything to your parents." I read it 3 times, and as the breeze carried the scent of cut grass over the dunes, I was suddenly 11 again. It is crazy how a smell does that. Back in Nebraska, it was alfalfa, and the night they sent me away, the whole farm reeked of it. The air was sweet under a deep purple sky. I had slipped downstairs for water and found my mother and her brother Roy at the table with bank statements spread out like cards. They were my grandmother Nadine's accounts, though I only realized that years later. Roy looked up, saw me in the doorway, and his face turned ice cold. He leaned toward my father, who had just come in from the fields, and hissed, "Look, the girl saw." My dad went pale as dishwater. No one explained anything to an 11-year-old. By morning, my bag was packed. My mother stood on the porch with her arms crossed as Ruth's headlights came up the driveway. When I begged her to tell me why I was leaving, she said words that scarred me for 2 decades. "He did not want you, Willa. Nobody did." I still remember my father in his green and black flannel, standing by the truck with his back to me, refusing to turn around. He did not turn when I screamed his name, or when I sobbed, or even when the screen door slammed so hard the whole porch shook. "Go," was all he said. So I left. For 20 years, I believed every word my mother told me, because an 11-year-old trusts her mother, and no one ever called to tell me different. But now, standing in the salt wind with my phone in hand, someone was finally reaching out. I am not a woman who jumps just because a stranger tells me to. My first move was trying to figure out who was behind that number, but when I dialed it, it went straight to a generic voicemail with no name. I ran the number through a reverse lookup, but only got an area code for eastern Nebraska. Sitting on the cold sand, I analyzed this like a veterinary diagnosis. This person had my cell number, knew I was away, and knew the word parents would hit a nerve. It was no mistake. Someone had done their homework. I texted back, asking who it was. The reply came fast. "It is about your father. Your mother and Roy cannot know you are coming." Seeing Roy's name from a stranger sent a shiver down my neck that 20 years of therapy had not erased. This was no prank. Pranksters do not know Roy. I stood up and brushed off the sand. Inside, my family was still laughing over cards, but through the screen door, Ruth caught my eye and her face fell. I chose not to tell Ruth. The text said to keep quiet, and an old instinct, sharper than my common sense, told me to honor that until I understood the game. Right there in the dark, I booked a red-eye flight from Norfolk to Omaha. I do not run from things. I never have. Whatever was waiting in Nebraska had been waiting 20 years, and I was done letting others dictate my life. On the plane during a long layover, I thought about the rumors. You might know how it feels to have your reputation dragged through the mud behind your back by the very people who should protect you. That is what they did to me. The town of Calhoun had been fed a very specific lie about who Willa Farrell was. The lie was that I was a difficult child, that I lied, stole, and that poor Glenn and Brenda had tried everything before shipping me away for the family's peace. I discovered this when I went back at 19 and watched grown adults change aisles in the feed store to avoid me. I did not waste my breath arguing. I learned early that you cannot convince people out of a conclusion they reached because it was comfortable. So, I stopped trying to win over anyone who had already written me off. I got incredibly good at the one thing they could never take from me: my education. I put myself through school and built a solid reputation in Montana for steady hands and honest work. Let the town keep its gossip. I had a better story written in my own ink. Sipping terrible airport coffee at 2 a.m, I had no idea what was actually at stake. The Farrell place was 400 acres of valuable bottomland held by my family since 1911. My grandmother, Nadine, had controlled all the money until she passed away 3 years ago, and nobody had even told me she died. Somewhere out there was a will, a barn, and a full accounting of who got what. Someone with 2 police officers thought I needed to know the truth badly enough to fly me across the country in the dark. I will be honest with you, because that is our deal. I did not fully trust a stranger with a Nebraska area code. So, before I let anyone guide my steps, I decided to run a little test of my own to make sure this was real. At 6 in the morning, at the Omaha gate, I dialed the old farmhouse number. It was a string of digits memorized in childhood and never once used since. It rang 4 times, then the recording. The voice was my mother's, older and flatter than I remembered, telling me to leave a message for Brenda and Roy at the Farrell residence. Roy, living in my grandmother's house. That told me far more than the stranger's message. I hung up before the beep. If my mother and uncle were running that place together, and someone official wanted me there without their knowledge, then the warning was not paranoia. It was a map. I had spent my adult life reading situations for the danger no one else wanted to name. A heifer about to kick, a rancher about to lose everything. I knew when things were going wrong, and this had that feel all the way down. I squared my shoulders and walked toward baggage claim. A man in a gray suit stood there, holding a folder to his chest and scanning faces, with 2 police officers waiting a polite distance behind him. He spotted me instantly. He knew my face on sight, which meant he had a photograph. This was planned. "Miss Farrell," he said, his voice carrying the careful kindness of a doctor. "I am sorry to do this to you here." I had flown 2,000 miles on a stranger's text, and I was not about to spend another hour in the dark. His name was Tom Beck. He had been my father's attorney for 19 years, though I had never heard his name in my life. The 2 behind him were investigators with the county attorney's office, introduced so plainly that the word did not even register for a second. We sat in a glassed-in airline office that someone had unlocked for us. It had a dusty fake plant in the corner and a wall clock that ticked way too loud. Tom Beck placed his folder on the table and folded his hands over it, looking like a preacher about to deliver a sermon he had rehearsed but absolutely dreaded. "Before I say anything else," he told me, "I need you to hear one thing clearly. Your father did not throw you out, Miss Farrell." I sat completely still. 20 years is a long time to carry a sentence like that in your chest, and his words went straight to the core of everything. I asked him what he meant, keeping my voice perfectly level. Keeping my voice level under pressure is about the only religion I have ever actually practiced in this life. He reached down and opened the folder. On top lay a single, cream-colored envelope, its corners soft from being handled. Across the front, in handwriting I had not seen since childhood but knew like my own heartbeat, was my name, Willa, in my father's hand. He pressed the pen so hard it nearly tore the paper, as if the words might escape if he did not pin them down. Tom Beck slid it toward me. I did not pick it up. The clock ticked. One of the investigators shifted her weight, and Tom Beck spoke the next words with agonizing gentleness. The room tilted sideways. "Your father passed away 6 days ago," he said. "He left everything to you, and 20 years ago, he sent you away to keep you safe." I got about as far as that word, safe. I have delivered devastating news to grieving people in barns and kitchens my entire career, and I had never once been the one to collapse. But I went down. Not dramatically. My knees just ceased to be mine. The gray carpet swung up, and the world dissolved into a white roar for a few seconds. I want to be clear about why, because it matters. I did not faint from weakness. I had flown all night on an empty stomach and 2 coffees, and a stranger had just told me that the father I spent 20 years hating had actually loved me the whole time and was now in the ground where I could never reach him. That is not weakness. That is grief arriving all at once with nowhere to put itself. When I came to, the female investigator was crouched beside me with a paper cup of water, repeating my name, and Tom Beck looked utterly stricken. I pushed the cup away, got my back against the wall, and sat up under my own power. First time in my life, I told them, my voice coming out rough, but mine. My patients would never let me hear the end of it. Nobody laughed, which was fair. I breathed until the room held still. Then I did the only thing I know how to do when everything falls apart, which is reach for the next true fact I can stand on. I did not want the water, and I did not want to be handled. I will be all right, I said. What I need is the file. Show me. Start at the beginning and do not soften any of it. I have had 20 years of soft. I am ready for the truth. Tom Beck poured some of the water I refused and decoded the message that had flown me home. The text was indeed his, sent from a burner phone bought for this exact purpose. The warning was real. My mother, Brenda, and my uncle Roy were the subjects of an open investigation. If either of them learned I was back before the right pieces were in place, everything my father built over 20 years could fall apart in an afternoon. They could move money and pressure witnesses. Roy, he said, choosing the phrase carefully, has a history of making people reconsider their statements. The investigators did not argue. I asked the obvious question. An investigation into what? Tom Beck looked at the officers, and the woman, Detective Pruitt, took it from there. Financial exploitation of an elder, Detective Pruitt said. Your grandmother, Nane Farrell. I felt the floor try to tilt again, but I planted both feet and would not let it. Nane had been the only warm adult of my childhood, the one who slipped me peppermints in church and let me name the barn cats. They drained her, Pruitt said flatly. Over years. Powers of attorney, accounts, signatures. We have had pieces of it for a long time, but never all of it. I looked at the folder, then at the envelope with my name in my father's desperate hand, and something inside me that had been curled up tight for 20 years started, very slowly, to stand. I did not cry. There would be time for that later, and not in front of these strangers. Keep going, I said. You said my father knew. How long had he known? Detective Pruitt and Tom Beck traded a look that told me I was not going to like the answer. Tom Beck spread the documents across the table, and I read them the way I read a medical chart, top to bottom, looking for the thing that does not fit. Withdrawals from Nanny's accounts went back 11 years, using a power of attorney she had signed when her eyesight was failing, with Roy as agent and my mother as successor. The transfers were always even amounts, designed to bypass bank alerts. $200,000 had vanished in small pieces to feed my mother and her brother. I have a clinical mind, and it is the only thing that kept me upright. But on the third page, my own memory suddenly snagged on a line and would not let go. A single large withdrawal of $12,000 was dated the 18th of June, the summer I was 11. I knew that date in my body. Detective Pruitt, I said, the 18th of June. That was my grandmother's birthday. We were all at the house. I came downstairs and saw my mother and Roy at the kitchen table with bank papers. Roy said, the girl saw. The next morning, I was gone. Pruitt went very still, pulling the page closer. "You have had this bank record for how long?" I asked. "About a year," she admitted. "You had the amount and the date, but you did not have the only person who was standing in that kitchen." For the first time, they looked at me not as a grieving daughter to be managed, but as something incredibly useful. The witness who could prove the theft. What I could prove was the why and the when, and the fact that an 11-year-old's accidental glimpse was the exact thing that got her shipped 3 states away. Tom Beck closed his eyes. "Your father knew," he said quietly. "He knew before you were 11. He just could not prove it yet. And he could not protect you and fight them at the same time." I wish I could say I melted into a daughter's gratitude right then, but I did not. I got angry. The clean, useful anger I trust far more than tears. "If he knew," I said, "explain something to me." "He knew I was in danger from his own wife, so he handed me over to Ruth and went completely radio silent for 20 years. No letters, no birthday calls. He let me grow up absolutely certain that he did not want me." So which was it? Was I his daughter? Or was I just a problem he filed away 3 states out of sight so I wouldn't mess up whatever long game he was playing? The investigator stared at the table, refusing to make eye contact. Tom Beck, however, did not look away. He had clearly been waiting for this exact question, which irritated me the way it always does when someone knows your mind better than they have any right to. "Your father told me you would ask that," he said softly. He said, "Willa is too smart to be bought with a sad story, so don't even try." There is a letter. He wrote it over many years and finished it this spring when his heart began to fail. He left strict instructions that you were not to get it until he was gone. "Not one day sooner," he said, and Tom Beck's voice caught for just a second. He was repeating my father's final decree. "If I let her open it while I am alive," my father had told him, "I will lose my nerve and ruin 20 years of work because the second I see my girl's face, I will tell her everything and damn the consequences." I sat there, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I did not trust a dead man's excuses yet, but I wanted to read those pages more than I had wanted anything in a long time. What truly gutted me was knowing Ruth was already driving to Omaha. She had taken a flight just 1 hour behind mine because Tom called her the second I texted back. When she walked into that airline office, 60 years old, gray and shaking, my chair scraped loud against the floor as I bolted to my feet. "You knew," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It was not a question. She did not look away from me, and I had to respect her courage for that much at least. "I knew," she confessed. "Your father came to me the week before he put you in my car and drove you away. He told me exactly what Brenda and Roy were doing, and he made me swear on our own dead mother that I would never tell you the real reason. He knew that if you found out, you would rush back to fix things the way you always tried to fix everything, and they would have hurt you to keep you quiet. He believed the only way to keep you safe was to make sure you wanted absolutely nothing to do with this place. He tried once," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That first Christmas, he could not stand the silence and gave me a card to mail you, with just his name written inside, nothing else." 2 weeks later, Roy stopped Glenn by the grain bins and told him, in that fake, friendly way of his, that it was a real shame about the girl all the way out at Ruth's place. "He used your actual name, Willa. Your father had told no living soul where you were except me. After that threat, He never sent another word because he knew for certain they were monitoring both my mailbox and yours. That was when I finally understood the danger we were in, too. So I let you believe a lie for 20 years, and I have hated myself for every single day of it. She reached down and set a box on the table between us, a plain banker's box taped tightly at the seams. On top of it, carefully folded, was the green and black work flannel my father had worn the last morning I saw him. I had not seen that jacket in 20 years, but I would have known it in the pitch dark. "He wanted you to have this," Ruth said. "He told me that when you open it, I had to make sure you were completely alone because you would need to be the only one in the room." I reached out and put my hand flat against the flannel. It still carried a faint, impossible scent of him, motor oil and pine. I took the box to a cheap motel off the interstate, locked the heavy deadbolt, and slid down to sit on the worn carpet with my back against the bed, just like I used to do as a kid when the world felt too big. Inside were only two things: a thick binder and a cream-colored envelope with my name on it. I opened the envelope first. The letter inside was 12 pages long, written over years like a ship log, his blocky handwriting growing softer and shaking near the end. He wrote about the night I walked downstairs and how Roy had threatened to make sure the girl forgets what she thinks she saw. Looking at his 11-year-old daughter, he knew he could not protect me and gather proof at the same time. So, my father made his choice. He sent me far beyond their reach and spent the next 20 years of his life quietly building the legal case I never could have helped him piece together. Near the bottom of that first page was a line I have read so many times since that I can recite it in my sleep. "I had to let you hate me to keep you alive." The binder was the actual proof, not some emotional diary or a grainy, useless recording. This was real paper, the kind that stands up in a courtroom. There were certified bank statements he had subpoenaed through a guardianship petition and a copy of a transfer on death deed for the 400 acres, signed and recorded at the county courthouse in 2019, naming me as the sole owner. There was correspondence with Detective Pruitt's office going back 2 years, and a revocable trust holding whatever was left of my grandmother Nan's money with my name on it. My father had not known how to love me out loud. Instead, he loved me in legal filings, in meticulously recorded deeds, and in 20 long years of letting me remain furious with him just so I would stay far away and keep breathing. I sat on that cold motel floor and cried the kind of deep, chest-heaving tears you only cry once a decade. If you have ever lost precious years with someone you loved because of a cruel lie that somebody else told, comment the word home down below. I read every single document in that binder, and if this channel is doing right by you, make sure to hit subscribe, because the part of the story that comes next is the whole reason I needed you to hear all of this first. I read his entire letter twice that night. On the second reading, the night I was 11 years old, rearranged itself in my mind, every jagged memory finally sliding into its true, terrible shape. Those bank papers on the table had belonged to my grandmother Nan, and as an 11-year-old child, I had walked right into the middle of a massive theft. I remembered Roy's cold face and his quiet warning to my mother about what the girls saw. My father had come in from the field, still smelling of fresh alfalfa, and his face had gone completely gray when he realized his only daughter had just become a dangerous loose end in his brother-in-law's eyes. He had to make a choice no parent should ever face: keeping me close or keeping me alive. He chose the path that cost him everything he ever wanted, but gave me the life I needed. He could not look at me by the truck that morning, because if he had, his letter said, he would have broken down. He would have pulled me back inside, fought them right there, and they would have destroyed us both. So he kept his back turned, let the screen door slam, and whispered the only word he could manage without sobbing. Go. For 20 painful years, I had carried that single word in my chest as a bitter rejection. Now, holding his trembling pages, I finally heard it for what it truly was, the hardest, most agonizing act of love a tired, desperate father could ever manage. His letter answered all the angry questions I had spent my life asking, the ones any sane person would ask. Why were there no secret late-night phone calls? Why no letters quietly slipped to me through Aunt Ruth? My father had meticulously thought through every single exit, and he had written down exactly why every door was shut. Roy still routinely intercepted Nan's mail and watched our family like a hungry hawk patrolling a fence line. Just one single card from my father to a daughter he had supposedly disowned would have proven to them that the witness still mattered, and they would have hunted me down. A total, freezing estrangement was the only defense that would hold up under that kind of watching, because it had to look completely real. As I read those pages a second time, I finally understood what Roy had actually wanted all those years. It was the same thing any careful, calculating thief wants. He did not want to hunt me down. A missing young girl brings sheriff deputies and search parties, and a dead one brings a full-scale murder investigation. The absolute last thing two greedy people skimming an old woman's life savings could afford was the county asking why her granddaughter had suddenly vanished. Roy simply needed me to stay gone and stay silent. Nothing more. And for 20 long years, I had obligingly done exactly both. The real danger was never a physical hunt. It was a door. And that door would only swing open if I dared to return, if I learned the truth, or if I opened my mouth. His casual threat to Glenn by the grain bins had not been a slip of the tongue. It was the whole message. We know exactly where she is. Keep her gone, and she stays safe. My father had heard that threat for exactly what it was, and he kept me safely locked behind that door for 2 full decades. Going to the law back then would have been a trap. He could not move against his own wife and her brother while they legally held my grandmother Nan's power of attorney without tipping them off. If he had, they would have shredded the records and buried the stolen money forever. He had to wait for the bank's own digital paper trail to ripen into undeniable proof, and he needed Nan to pass away before the estate could even be opened for probate. So he waited, quietly documented every single transaction, and recorded that deed the very first moment he safely could in 2019. He let me hate him every single day of that wait, because a daughter who hates her father does not come home and walk directly into a trap. It did not cure my grief, but it redirected my burning anger right toward the people who had actually earned it. I thought of my mother, who had stood on that porch, looked her crying 11-year-old daughter in the eye, and chosen the cruelest possible lie to tell me. I thought of her brother, Roy, who had made my own father fear for my very life. They were currently 40 miles south of my motel room, sleeping soundly in my late grandmother's house, counting an inheritance they truly believed was theirs. They had absolutely no idea that I had returned. In the morning, I met Tom Beck at his law office in town, and he laid out exactly where things stood. My father's funeral had been small and rushed, just the way Brenda wanted it, before anyone could start asking questions. The reading of the will was officially scheduled for Friday at the farmhouse, 3 days away. My mother had insisted on hosting it at the house in front of our family, the pastor, and a few longtime neighbors, because Brenda Farrell never met an audience she did not want to perform her tragic grief for. My mother fully believed she was inheriting all 400 acres of land, along with whatever money Nan had left behind, and she had already hired a lawyer of her own to draft paperwork to lock it down. Tom Beck slid a fresh, official document across his heavy oak desk toward me. 2 weeks before your father passed away, he explained, your mother had him sign what she told the local notary was simply a renewal of an active farm lease. In reality, it was a quitclaim deed transferring the ownership of the entire land to her. I felt my pulse spike in my throat, but I forced my breathing to slow down. Did it work? I asked, my voice tight. Tom almost smiled at me. No, he said. You cannot legally give away what you do not own anymore. Your father had already recorded that transfer on death deed to you back in 2019, Willa. A legally recorded deed like that controls who owns the land the absolute second a person draws their last breath. No matter what any later piece of paper says, and no matter what she managed to write into some fake will, she tried to steal a family farm that he had already legally given away to his daughter. She just does not know it yet. I sat in silence, letting that truth wash over me. I could have easily gone back to Montana, let the lawyers resolve this by mail, and never set foot on that cursed property again. That would have been the safe choice, the comfortable one. But it would have also been the small choice. And I am simply not built for small things. Put me on the list for Friday, I told Tom. I want to be sitting right in that room. Let her think I am only there to cry. I did not even wait for Friday to lay eyes on them. On Wednesday afternoon, I drove out to the farm, navigating a county road I had not traveled since I was 19. The fields were filled with the second cutting of alfalfa, that same sweet green scent pouring through my truck windows and straight into my chest. But when I pulled up, the house looked smaller and far meaner than I had remembered. I hadn't even killed the truck's engine when my mother stepped onto the porch, and 20 years of exile collapsed in the worst way. Brenda Farrell stood there, a hard, handsome woman carrying her grief like a stage prop, dabbing at dry eyes. Well, she said, look what the wind blew in. Roy loomed behind her, grayer, heavier, with those same flat, dead eyes. Beside him was Travis, my 27-year-old half-brother, a stranger raised on the lie that I was the bad seed. I told her I only came for my father's service, watching her decide I was harmless. Then she softened into a toxic pity. Honey, she cooed, you came a long way for a man who shipped you off and never looked back. You always did make everything about you. Then, because she couldn't help herself, she spoke the words she had branded me with on this very porch. Cruelty was her native tongue. He didn't want you, Willa, she whispered. Nobody did. The sweet, dusty smell of alfalfa swirled around us in the hot Nebraska air. I didn't say a word about the legal binder sitting inside my truck. I just stared back at her, my face as calm as a frozen pond. Friday, she sneered. You can come hear the will and then go back to your animals. I told her I wouldn't miss it. As I walked away, Travis followed me to my truck. He was twitchy, like a man who'd been promised a free kingdom but was suddenly watching the math get complicated. You shouldn't have come, he muttered. Not unkind, just deeply nervous. Mom and Roy have got it all settled, Travis said, repeating what he'd been fed. The land, Grandma's accounts, all of it. I kept my voice flat. What papers? He told me that 2 weeks before Dad died, he signed the farm over to Mom, free and clear, and a lawyer in Fremont had it locked up tight. So that was the quitclaim deed Tom Beck had warned me about. The one my mother thought was her winning hand. They weren't bluffing because they were lying. They were bluffing because they genuinely believed they had already won. That was useful. A person who thinks they've won gets careless. They say things out loud that a careful person would never say. I asked Travis gently whether he had ever actually seen the things Mom said I did as a kid. The stealing, the lies. Travis blinked. "Well, no," he admitted. "I was little, but she told me. She told me a lot of things." Then he stopped, like a man hearing his own sentence from the outside for the first time. I let it sit. I did not push. You plant the seed and let the rain do the rest. I told him I would see him Friday and drove back to town with the windows down. For the first time since my father's death, I felt something other than grief. I felt the cold, clean focus I get right before a hard surgery, when I already know exactly where the trouble is and exactly what my hands are going to do about it. I am not going to lie to you and tell you it was a sure thing, but I knew my next move. That afternoon, Tom Beck walked me through exactly what I had and what I didn't, because false hope is just a slower kind of cruelty. What I had was incredibly strong. The recorded transfer on death deed meant the 400 acres were set to pass directly to me at my father's death, ahead of the will and ahead of my mother's clumsy quitclaim. The trust held Nadine's money in my name. These weren't promises. They were filed, stamped, time-stamped facts set in motion back in 2019, long before my mother made her move. But Tom wouldn't let me mistake strong for untouchable. "She can still go after the deed itself," he warned. "If she can convince a judge your father lacked capacity in 2019, we could be in trouble." But a fight was a fight, and judges were human, so this was never going to be a clean sweep. Under Nebraska law, my mother, as Glenn's surviving spouse, had a right to claim an elective share of his estate, a slice she could not be entirely cut out of. There were also 2 old joint accounts that would simply pass to her. She would fight. She would hire a ruthless lawyer, drag this out for months, and claw for whatever she could get. The land, though, the very heart of the farm that my father spent 20 years protecting, sat on the strongest footing the law can give a person. Tom Beck said so in exactly those words, before adding his warning that the strongest hand is still not a guarantee. With a marriage this long and a farm this valuable, she can make this slow, ugly, and expensive, Tom warned. Expect a year, maybe 2, of lawyers before a court puts it to bed. He believed the deed would hold, but he wouldn't promise it would hold easy. My father hadn't won the war in advance. He had simply handed me the best cards at the table and the heavy burden of playing them. He had filed the boring, meticulous paperwork that dramatic people like my mother never bother with. The boring paperwork that actually holds when everything else burns to ash. I asked Tom if my mother knew the land was already gone from her grasp. He shook his head. "She thinks Friday is her coronation." I decided I wasn't going to take that certainty away from her a single minute early. Roy found me Thursday evening, behind the implement shed, where I had walked to look at the old hay rake my father used to let me ride. I heard his boots on the gravel before I saw him, and the back of my neck did the thing it had done when I was 11. He stopped close, too close, trying to make me feel small. "You're stirring something up," he said. "I can smell it on you." I told him coldly I was here for a funeral. He smiled without any warmth. "Let me give you some family advice, girl. This family eats people who come back. Glenn learned to keep his mouth shut. You should think about doing the same and getting on a plane." 20 years ago, that voice put me in a car to another state. Standing there at 31, I finally and completely understood the exact fear my father had carried and why he made the choice he made. I did not back up. I also did not pretend to be bigger than I am. I took one step to the side, out of his reach, looked at my watch, and noted the time out loud so he would see me do it. 5:41 p.m. on Thursday, I said. You just threatened me behind the shed. I am a witness in an active investigation, Roy. From this minute on, everything you say to me goes directly into a statement. He went completely still. That was the moment the power started to shift, and we both felt it. He had his physical size, but I had a date, a time, and a detective's phone number. I called Detective Pruitt from my truck before leaving the driveway, and she told me the investigation had moved further than anyone in that house suspected. The bank had already flagged the patterns, and the guardianship file my father started was now cataloged as evidence. My identification of the June 18th withdrawal, tied directly to the night they sent me away, gave them the human thread they had been missing. It turned a cold financial spreadsheet into a real story a jury would understand. Brenda and Roy still thought they were just managing a simple will reading. They had no idea a county attorney was reviewing the exact same pages. If you have made it this far with me, you already feel where this is going. I need you to stay with me, because what happens in that farmhouse on Friday is the entire reason I told you all of this. Hit the like button so this can reach just one more person who was told they were the problem in a family that was actually the toxic one. That night, Travis called me. He didn't say much, asking a single question in a small voice that didn't match his size. Did Dad really write you a letter? I told him yes. He was quiet for a long time before asking what it said. I read him 3 lines, the ones explaining why our father turned his back on us. My brother, who spent his whole life hearing my mother's lies about me, began to breathe heavily over the phone, fighting tears. Something in him came loose. On Thursday night, I sat down with Tom Beck and told him exactly how Friday was going to go, because I refused to be a passenger at my own reckoning. Most people would let the lawyer stand up and read the deed, letting the dry facts do the talking. But I wanted more than facts. I wanted the truth and the lie in the exact same room at the same time, so nobody in that house could ever again pretend they didn't see it. Here is what I told him. Do not lead with the deed. Let my mother run the room first. Let her stand up in front of the pastor and the neighbors, telling the story she has been spinning for 20 years. Let her claim I was sent away for being a thief, and that she is the loyal widow inheriting the farm. My plan was simple. Let her commit to every single word out loud in front of witnesses, and only when she had nailed her lies to the wall would we open the folder. Tom Beck looked at me for a long moment, telling me this was not how he usually did a reading. I told him I knew, but she had been playing this game for 20 years while he played it safe. I was not asking her to confess. I wanted her to perform the lie one last time in front of everyone, and then I would hand her the paper. He sat back and murmured that my father would have loved this, noting he was a patient man too. When Friday came, gray and warm with the heavy scent of alfalfa, I put on my only black dress and drove to the farmhouse to give her exactly enough rope. Walking into the front room of the farmhouse was like stepping onto a stage designed entirely by my mother. Folding chairs sat in neat rows, the good lamp was lit, and the pastor sat right up front. There were 2 gray-haired neighbors I half remembered, Ruth in the back with her hands tightly knotted in her lap, my brother Travis leaning against the wall by the window, and Roy, planted by the door like a guard. Brenda sat right in the center, wearing her black dress with her chin held high, looking like a widow at her coronation. Tom Beck took his place at the front, keeping his folder closed. I chose a seat off to the side where I could watch every single face. Naturally, my mother did not wait for the lawyer to start. She opened the floor herself. She stood up, turning toward the pastor and the neighbors, her voice trembling with a perfectly rehearsed sorrow as she began her grand performance. She spun a tale about how incredibly hard her marriage had been and how she had stood by my father through everything, including the supposed burden of a daughter who lied, stole, and had to be sent away for the family's safety. She gestured in my direction without ever looking me in the eye. She told the room they did everything they could and that I repaid them by breaking my father's heart. Now, she claimed, I had the nerve to show up only because there was money on the table. The neighbors nodded in sympathy, and the pastor gently patted her hand. She was magnificent like a wildfire, completely unaware she was standing in her own kerosene. Behind me, the screen door that had been propped open swung loose in the warm breeze, creaking softly as Detective Pruitt and her partner stepped quietly into the back of the room. I was the only one who noticed. I locked eyes with Tom Beck and gave him the smallest, sharpest nod. He opened the folder, and I stared at my mother's face, having waited 2 decades for what was about to happen. Tom did not raise his voice. He never does. He simply read the official record. On the 4th of March, 2019, Glenn Farrell executed a transfer-on-death deed, conveying all 400 acres of the farm to his daughter, Willa Farrell, effective at his death. The document controlled the land, rendering any subsequent wills or transfers completely useless. He read on, explaining that a revocable trust held the remaining funds of Nan Farrell in my name, and that the quitclaim deed Brenda had forced my father to sign 2 weeks before his death conveyed absolutely nothing. By then, he owned nothing left to give. The realization did not hit the room all at once. It came in slow stages, like ice breaking on a frozen river. The neighbors stared at me, then at Brenda. The pastor's comforting hand froze. My mother stood up so violently her chair clattered backward, her carefully crafted face stripping away to reveal pure fury. "This is fraud!" she shrieked, her voice cracking in a high register I had never heard before. She claimed he was sick, that he did not know what he was signing, and that I had manipulated a dying man. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, letting her burn, knowing I was the only person in the room who needed to remain calm. When she finally ran out of breath, I spoke softly, forcing everyone to lean in. "He did not send me away," I said. "He sent me out of your reach. There is a massive difference, and you spent 20 years making sure I never understood it." She tried to interrupt, but I kept my gaze locked on her, speaking gently. "You told me on that porch that he did not want me, that nobody did. Yet he spent the next 20 years proving you wrong on legal paper, pressing his name so hard into the deed it almost tore through." Suddenly, she shifted tactics like a drowning person, stepping toward me with outstretched hands and a trembling, sweet voice. She whispered that we could work it out, family to family, and split everything fairly. Just the 2 of us, with no lawyers or police involved. For a fleeting second, I saw the ghost of the frightened, impoverished girl she must have been once, the one who had sworn she would never be powerless again. I actually felt the slight pull of sympathy, but it passed in an instant. "There is no deal," I replied coldly. "There is only what is recorded." That was the moment Detective Pruitt stepped forward, instantly shifting the temperature of the room. She calmly introduced herself and her partner, announcing that this was not just a simple estate dispute. There was an open investigation into the exploitation of Nan Farrell, and she advised certain people to speak to an attorney before saying another word. She did not immediately slap handcuffs on anyone. Real life always moves slower and feels much heavier than what you see on television. Instead, she laid the certified bank statements flat on the table right next to my father's deed. Looking at no one in particular, she noted that they had recently confirmed a crucial date with a witness who had been present in the house the exact night this pattern of deceit began. Every single head in the room knew exactly whose date she was talking about. My mother's mouth opened and closed in silent panic. Roy was already slipping out the door, with Pruitt's partner following him without any rush. Then, my brother Travis, who had spent his entire life being told what a monster I was, stood up, walked to the center of the room, and spoke. "She told me Willis stole," Travis said, his voice shaking. "My entire life, I never once saw a single shred of proof." He did not look at me as he spoke, and he did not need to. He was not suddenly switching to my side or begging for my forgiveness, and I certainly did not expect him to. He was simply a man who could no longer stand in his father's house and carry a lie that heavy. The pastor scrambled to his feet while the neighbors whispered, the elaborate story my mother had spent 20 years building, completely dissolving in front of the only audience she had ever cared to fool. Tom Beck quietly closed the folder, announcing the reading was over. In the heavy silence that followed, with the smell of alfalfa drifting in, I looked at my father's signature and realized I had not won. You and I both know that you cannot simply win back 20 years of a stolen life. But the truth was finally in that room, and it was never going to leave with my mother's twisted version of the story again. People always want to know the cold, hard numbers at the end of things. So let me lay it out plainly. The land was mine, free and clear, and absolutely nothing my mother filed afterward could change that. She did pursue her elective share as a surviving spouse, which the law allowed, and she managed to get a portion of the remaining estate. Her lawyers dragged it out, making it as slow and expensive as possible, just like I was warned they would. Roy's case was referred to the county attorney, and the exploitation case is still grinding slowly through the legal system today. I did not get a neat, happy ending wrapped in a tidy bow. What I actually got was the truth officially on the record, and a massive farm I never expected to want. I stayed behind for 2 weeks after the funeral to sort through the chaos. On my final evening, I walked out into the bottomland alone in the long golden light. It was 400 acres of fresh alfalfa that my father had moved heaven and earth to protect for me. I wore his green and black flannel work shirt, the one Ruth had salvaged from his things, and it still swallowed me whole, just like it did when I was a kid. Sitting on the tailgate at the edge of the field, I read the final, shaky page of his last letter, signed with the words, "Your father, who never once stopped." Even with the landmine, the grief did not lift. Honestly, I do not think the grief will ever completely fade. But sitting there in his oversized flannel jacket, on his soil, with his handwritten words resting in my lap, I realized that for the first time in 20 years, I was exactly where he had always wanted me to be. Home and safe. Finally knowing that truth, I faced my mother one last time the morning I prepared to leave. She stood on the very porch where she had branded me a thief when I was only 11. She tried to babble about family and how I would regret cutting her off, calling me ungrateful. I kept my voice completely calm, looked at her, and said that she did not get to tell the story anymore because the records do. I walked down the steps, reached back, and let the screen door slam shut behind me forever. Some people love you out loud, with phone calls, birthdays, and warm arms wrapped around you. My father loved me in silence, in paperwork, letting me hate him for 20 years just so I would stay far away, safe and breathing. Honestly, I would trade every acre of this farm for one more chance to hear his squeaky screen door close gently behind him as he came in from the fields. That is my story, a strange message on a beach, and a father who played the villain so I would never have to grow up beside the real one. If this reminded you of the quiet ones silently protecting you, go call them today, before the only letters left are the kind a lawyer hands you across a table. Share this, drop a comment, subscribe, and I will see you next time.